A Japanese man has just finished a game that took him 3 years to complete, but that is far from what he truly wanted. According to him, the game is far too weak. He wishes he could find one that would last 10 years. Searching for that, he comes across an online game that claims to never end, an endless adventure filled with magic and fantasy. Looking at the available difficulty options, he notices one called Hell Mode, whose description reads, "Regret is the least of your worries, for what you are about to face is the true meaning of despair." Intrigued by the dramatic line, the player chooses that difficulty and then faces the class selection screen. Among the usual classes, such as Swordsman, he is fascinated by Demon Lord, but becomes curious about how difficult the Conjurer seems to be, since it automatically places the player in the social class of Servant and is still in a testing phase. Motivated by a worthy challenge, the moment he clicks to start the game, the Japanese man is pulled into the screen. Sometime later, he wakes up with a younger voice around him, in an environment similar to a womb. In fact, after pushing his way out, he is born again into a place with a medieval atmosphere. After his father picks up the baby, sees that he is a boy, he decides his name will be Alan. Next, we see information explaining that the difficulty Alan chose requires 100 times more XP to level up compared to normal difficulty, but has no level limit. By overcoming despair, we will come to understand the beginning of this world. As time goes by, Alan grows up in a humble home filled with love and attention from his parents. He used to be a 35-year-old Japanese man broke, without a degree, and bad with women named Kanishi Yamada. Now, even though he is a 1-year-old baby and cannot speak, he is able to easily understand the words he hears, mainly because, by luck, Japanese seems to be the main language in this place. Alan was born into a family of servants, just as he selected at the beginning, in a border village where peasants pay taxes to a lord in order to farm the land. His father's name is Rodden. Alan believes Rodden is around 20 years old and sees him as a typical family man who works hard to support his child. His mother's name is Teresha, a very beautiful and kind woman who appears to be in her late teens. That night, after yawning in front of his parents, Alan is put to bed, but instead of sleeping, he raises his hands and mentally commands "status window," imagining it would work like in any isekai. Frustrated that nothing appears, he understands that being spoiled and all is nice, but it is already time for him to start being a conjurer, since he has been trying for a year without success. Then, after some effort, that same night he manages to make a magic book appear in front of him, which makes him scream and immediately alerts his parents. They run to see what happened, but before they can see the book, Alan makes it disappear right as they arrive. Since he pretends to be asleep, his parents believe he was only dreaming or something like that. When the adults leave, the child brings the book back and, upon opening it, finally confirms that he really belongs to the conjurer class. Because of his lack of experience, he is still limited to summoning only a few insects and beasts. Other than that, he notices a message in the book from someone named Elmia, the god of creation. In this message, Elmia says it took some time to finish developing the class properly, and now that it has been chosen by players, none of them will be allowed to switch. Alan interprets this as the reason why his book took so long to arrive. Setting that aside, he notices there are no tutorials explaining how to play the game, meaning he will have to figure out everything on his own. To test his abilities, the first thing Alan tries is creating an insect, and when he does, a card with an insect of rank H appears in front of him. But upon hearing his mother approaching, he pretends to sleep again. Because he is only 1 year old, he ends up falling asleep for real, unable to control his tiredness. The next day, his normal peasant life continues as always. However, whenever he is alone, Alan now has something new to do, because he can finally develop his techniques as a true conjurer. After creating the card, he summons the insect inside it, a somewhat dumb grasshopper that doesn't understand commands and acts like a regular bug. Checking the book to understand how it works, Alan sees that he must give the creature a name, so he starts calling it Denka. As a pleasant surprise, he notices that Denka gives him a status buff of +1 in endurance and agility. He becomes so happy that he shouts, once again drawing his mother's attention, who understands his strange reactions less and less each day. She even sees Denka jumping near her foot and, startled, ends up stepping on him and killing him at least until he is summoned again. As the days pass and Alan keeps practicing, he eventually learns to summon rank H beasts as well. In this case, a little mouse that is also dumb just like Denka, according to Alan. Even so, it gives him a +1 buff to HP and agility, along with a skill called Dash. At least the little creature uses this ability whenever Alan commands it, which is already progressed. Tenka, for his part, has the skill Leap. As he develops these abilities, Alan reflects on how this world must be filled with huge, powerful creatures enemies he certainly won't be able to defeat with the dynamic duo he can summon today. The boy also discovers that he's able to store up to 10 conjuration cards for each creature, and that the most important among them are the buffs. For example, by storing 10 rat cards, his attack increases by 10 points, which certainly explains why Alan showed his parents a strength far greater than what a simple baby should display. In any case, knowing that the experience needed to level up in Hell mode is 100 times higher than normal, the boy has been struggling quite a bit just to advance a few steps. Suddenly, in the middle of the morning, Rodden arrives home covered in blood and holding a spear, but reassures his wife by explaining that he wasn't hurt, it was just the result of hunting a boar a short while ago. Alan shows interest in seeing the boar, so his father puts him on his shoulder to take him for a little walk. Thus, this was the first time Alan was being taken outside the house. Looking around, he was impressed by the beauty and tranquility of that late afternoon. Along the way, Rodden points to a flock of monsters called Albahiron, which always gather and migrate north at this time of year, indicating the arrival of autumn. Speaking of which, Rodden says he named Alan after the Albahiron, because for them, the sky is the limit. These creatures can use their wings to fly anywhere in the world they want true freedom. However, he admits he got scolded when he told Teresia that, since he had chosen their son's name based on a monster. Sometime later, the two reach the boar that had been taken down, a gigantic creature that makes the baby open his mouth in awe. Getting closer, he admits it must be terrifying to face something that size. One of the hunting companions, Gerda, announces Rodden as the one mainly responsible for killing the boar, which earns him a big tribute from the other men. Gerda notices his friend brought his son, so Alan introduces himself with a level of politeness that is literally frightening. Since Gerda has a 1-year-old daughter, Krina, who is nowhere near having that kind of vocabulary, Alan asks if that big beast is strong, and the man says it takes 20 hunters to bring down a C-rank creature like that. 10 months later, Alan was able to conjure rank G creature cards, as well as fuse summons, and the space for cards in his inventory had doubled, which means twice the amount of buffs he could receive. Since fusion required a lot of mana points, he ate and took good care of himself to accumulate the amount needed to use the technique. When everything was ready, he tried mixing 2 rat cards, but despite his excitement, he realized he still didn't have enough MP. Frustrated, he decided to just create another rank G conjuration card, but he couldn't do that either with his current mana limit. Upon turning 3, the boy could create creature cards such as frogs and moles. Mixing the two, he created a card of a rank G bird, granting a +2 buff to agility and intelligence. From that, he named the bird Chappie, which had the skill vocal mimicry, basically Chappie perfectly imitating Alan's voice. Then he conjured the frog, which he began to call Hopper, bearer of the skill Taunt, useful for distracting enemies. The mole, of course, had the skill Dig, very useful for hideouts and traps. As he developed and studied more about his class, Alan discovered that the secret was to know every status deeply so he could create a powerful combination of buffs for each situation. In his opinion, this was a complex and challenging game, exactly what he had been looking for a long time. On the other hand, it's worth noting that Alan is far from summoning creatures strong enough to stand against the possible dragons and boars the world has. In any case, now that it is 3 in the afternoon, the boy hears the voice of a girl challenging him to a knight's duel, one of the activities he doesn't seem to like very much. Even so, Alan presents himself for a duel against Krina, the fierce, at least that's what she called herself. In turn, his rival self proclaimed herself Alan the Honored, and although he pretended to be motivated for the fight, he grumbled internally about having to take this seriously every time. Anyway, serious or not, when the fight begins, Alan takes a series of blows from a wooden sword at an incredible speed. Even though he put all his buffs into agility, the boy admits he can barely block the swords. In the end, Krina breaks Alan's sword in half and secures the victory. At the end of the afternoon, she goes to the boy's house to announce her achievement. Smiling and pregnant with another baby, Teresia asks the girl to head home before it gets dark, and that's what she does. Lying there shattered like it was nothing, Alan suffers the pain of defeat on the ground. Still, at dinner time, the boy volunteers of his own free will to help with the potato harvest, knowing that his mother is heavily pregnant and can't work normally. Internally, Alan knows that at this point he has the vitality of an adult man, even though he's only 3 years old in practice. Teresia and Rodden say that children should never have to work, and that the boy should keep playing with Krina, especially because he already helps inside the house. The child insists, but his parents advise him to enjoy himself as much as he can, because the time will come when he will have to work on the farm, whether he wants to or not. Hearing this, Alan concludes that he and his parents will always be servants until they die, practicing this exhausting labor every day without being able to change their fate. Changing the subject, Teresia and her husband say they saw their son throwing stones at a tree earlier and want to know why. Alan says that his parents themselves warned him about the existence of monsters outside the house, so he has been training to protect his mother with stones. That said, while his father hugged him proudly, the truth was that Alan was only trying to see if he could learn techniques that went beyond conjuration. Teresia asks if her son is also going to protect Krina, but when he remembers how their last duel went, the boy figures she can already handle herself. Rodden comments that he can't wait for the two of them to attend their evaluation ceremony, and when Alan asks what that is, his mother explains that when he turns 5, he will take part in a divine ceremony that determines what talent he possesses. Rodden hopes it will be a talent good enough to pull his son away from a servant's life, and that hope lifts everyone's spirits in the house that night. Some time later, it begins to snow in the village. After continuing his training, Alan is now able to maintain a summoned creature for an entire day without any problems. On the other hand, in his duels against Krina, since she also comes from a conjurer background, the boy struggles a lot to withstand the girl's overwhelming pace. She keeps dominating every match and knocking the kid flat. One day, after Alan loses yet again, Teresia ends up falling to the ground when she gets startled by Denka, which causes her water to break, and now she's about to give birth again. She is quickly taken to a bed in a warm place so everything can go well. But because he's doing everything by himself, Rodden starts worrying that things won't go as smoothly as he hoped. Since Alan is the only one there to help, Krina runs off to call her parents, so Gerda shows up with Matilda, his wife, to help the poor man. Hours pass as Matilda handles the situation and makes sure the delivery happens without complications. It's such a difficult and drawn-out labor that it lasts until the next day, until finally a baby's cry reaches the ears of the men sleeping outside. When the father goes into the room and learns it's another boy, Teresia asks him to choose the name. So Rodden names their second son Mesh. Teresia really likes it, but hopes he didn't take the name from some monster. The poor guy tries to explain himself in every possible way, but Teresia starts laughing. When everyone begins laughing together, Alan can't help thinking about something he has thought ever since he reincarnated into this world. He isn't even a little bit sad about leaving his entire past behind, because the difference between his old life and this one is enormous. It's true, of course, that he'll give everything he has to progress in the game to obtain the best equipment and spells, but when his parents call him over to meet his brother, Alan feels that there is much more to this life than glory and achievements. From that moment on, he decides that his greatest goal is to free his family from servitude. Sometime later, when Alan is 5 years old, he asks his father what the aptitude ceremony is like, and the man explains that it's a special event where everyone from servants to nobles must participate when they turn 5. If Alan shows good aptitude, for example, he might have a chance to rise in life and stop being a servant. The problem is that he'll have several rivals. The boy doesn't understand what that means, so his father explains that when they first arrived in these lands, people started having child after child. In other words, there are a whole bunch of kids the same age as Alan right now. At that moment, Krina appears over the father's shoulder and calls Alan so they can go to the event together. With that, the four gather, and after the walk, Krina is impressed by the number of houses they find in the village where the test will take place. While Alan looks around in admiration, Krina swears she will become a knight if she's designated as a swordsman. When they arrive at a church where the test will be held, Alan notices the commoners wearing clothes much nicer than his, obviously having more money than his family. He even hears some guys picking on him for being a servant. Amid all this, the religious officials open the church door and ask for the blessing of Elmia, the god of creation, so that all children may have equal opportunities. Since this country has seen heroes whose bloodlines once belonged to servitude. For example, Claces, the saint, was a humble commoner by birth, while Diverg, the sword lord, was once merely a servant. Feeling hopeful after hearing this, Alan recalls that before he reincarnated, he saw that classes like hero and sword lord needed to start in lower social classes. Next, the participants are called inside the church to begin the long-awaited evaluation. Alan notices the statue of Elmia, the god of creation. Then the leader of the religious group invites the village chief, Deboji, to begin the evaluations with his son, Palomas. Every child must touch the crystal ball. Then the attributes and talents that are revealed will be written on the metal plate behind the priest. With that, tension takes over the village leader, who starts sweating from so much anticipation. Not very differently, his son approaches the crystal ball. Then his attributes appear on the metal plate, arranged in the same way Alan saw on his own status page. According to what was written, Palomas has the talent to be a merchant, which leaves his father extremely satisfied and emotional, not understanding much and thinking any talent becomes a reason to celebrate. Alan checks his grimoire, which only he can see, and notices that the attributes are displayed as ranks instead of numbers. Meanwhile, another boy takes the evaluation, and upon discovering he has no talent at all, he runs off crying to his father, who lovingly hugs him. Next, a cocky kid slaps his own face before discovering his talent, for good luck. Then he celebrates when he learns he is an Axeman, and Alan is impressed that this boy, Dagora, got one of the attributes with rank of the first one he has seen in his life. As time goes by, all the children take their evaluations until only Alan and Krina are left at the end. Eager to get this thing done, Krina runs toward the crystal ball, and as she extends her hand, the magical item emits an extraordinary glow. Then the metal plate shows that the girl has the talent to become a sword lord, which is practically a miracle. While everyone is stunned by the rarity of such a powerful talent, Krina grumbles that she wanted to be a swordsman, and Alan understands why this girl has always been overpowered in their duels. Now, the son of Rodin is finally called for his evaluation, the last child of the event. Without showing anxiety, Alan only needs to touch the crystal ball and finally show his parents that he is a conjurer. However, he is literally thrown backward because of the brutal magical force radiating from the item, along with a light twice as bright as when Krina was evaluated. Unable to read, Rodin runs to ask the priest what the result was, but incredibly, the boy has no talent at all, where his class should be. The plate shows a glitch filled with random letters. Enraged, Alan begins cursing the families of the devs who can't fix this piece of junk game. But Rodin remains calm and calls his son to go back home. Hours later, the two return to the arms of Teresia and Mash, which warms Alan's heart immediately. And not just then when everyone gathers around the fire. His parents make it clear that he will always be precious to them, regardless of having talent or not. Faced with so much affection, Alan recognizes that his family is so poor they don't even have a bathtub. But that doesn't stop him from being happy. At bedtime, the boy reviews his grimoire and checks that he truly has all rank E attributes, which leads Alan to discover something. He is the only one in this world playing on Hell mode. Everyone who took the evaluation was 5 years old, which means they should all be level 1 just like Alan. However, it seems that the rank system probably reflects how much development they can expect each time they level up. So the reason Alan has all rank E attributes is because his growth speed in Hell mode is almost 100 times slower than normal, and this seems to mean that his ranks are showing the same fraction of the real value. After spending a lifetime playing easy games, Kenichi Yamada was reborn into this world where he is the only player on Hell mode, which could drive anyone insane in his place, but Alan refuses to give up. After all, he threw himself into this challenge precisely to put ridiculously easy games in their place. Speaking of which, it was pretty clear that the nonsense written in place of his class was just a clumsy glitch. So the devs should fix it soon, and Alan is ready to complain to those guys until everything is perfect, just to prove that no one should mess with a gamer with no social life. The next morning, Alan asks his mother why his father is like that, since the man has been acting strange since last night. Near nightfall, the whole family goes to Krina's house to celebrate the girl being discovered as a sword lord. Excited, she tells Alan that a sword lord is stronger than a swordsman, and the kid pretends to play dumb to hide that he didn't know. Matilda also says the village chief stopped by to gift the family a liquor, and trying to hide his happiness, Rodin keeps a straight face and tells everyone to enjoy the drink. Alan starts to suspect that his father is jealous of Krina for becoming a sword lord, but he doesn't think his father is that kind of person. Gerda asks Rodin to take the first sip of the liquor, because according to him, visitors should drink first. Faced with Gerda's insistence, an argument begins between the two until Gerda reveals that Rodin wants to cut ties between the two families. Cornered, Rodden explains that this wasn't what he wanted, and that Krina's talent is so extraordinary that she might even become a knight and serve the country, having a good chance of reaching nobility one day. Because of that, in his opinion, important people like her shouldn't waste time socializing with servants. With that said, the argument between Rodden and Gerda starts getting close to turning into a fight. So Alan asks Krina to do something about the two of them, but their wives get there first, showing that physical aggression can also solve problems. After the punch Matilda lands on her husband's face, Alan learns that you shouldn't mess with that woman. The boy asks her if those two have always been this hard-headed, and she says that becoming parents made them mature to a certain extent, because back then they used to trade punches almost every day. Teresia says the two couples have been friends since childhood, and that's why they grew up together. While Matilda tells the story of when they found out about the founding of a new village 10 years ago, and the four of them decided to build their own houses on that land. So their houses look quite similar. Rodden and Gerda start competing again to see who worked more on the construction. But they make peace after drinking the liquor they both haven't touched since they got married. At dawn, while working, Gerda learns that the Knight Order is after Krina. For that reason, alongside his friends, he takes his daughter to the city where yesterday's evaluation took place. Surprisingly, the news about a sword lord existing among the commoners spread quickly, making many people already aware that Krina was the talented child. Suddenly, Dogora appears holding a club and looking angry, and Alan remembers he was that axe-wielding brat from the evaluation. Dogora asks what Alan is doing there, since this city isn't a place for talentless losers. Immediately, Krina steps between them to protect her friend, and Gerda has to hold his daughter back before she beats the kid up. At that moment, the Knight Order arrives, imposing respect on the population as they watch in admiration the arrival of Captain Zenoff, a sword master, and his subordinates. When they get off their horses, the village chief calls Gerda and his daughter, and Alan notices how excited his friend is about all of this. It's only been 3 years since the two of them started pretending to duel, and now she is standing before a golden opportunity. However, Gerda doesn't seem pleased with the captain's proposal for Krina to join the Knight Order, arguing that she is still too little and doesn't have the strength to hold a real sword. Zenoff not only says the girl is a sword lord, but that he will take it as a lie if the father refuses the proposal, a direct attempt to deceive Baron Granville. According to the officer, falsifying the evaluation is punishable by death, and seeing the father hesitate, it will be necessary to verify whether the child's talent is legitimate or not. Given the situation, the village chief proposes a duel. Gerda begs for mercy, but Zenoff makes it clear that if Krina doesn't fight, she will be executed along with her family. Despair overtakes everyone watching that cruel scene except Krina, who, upon seeing a sword being offered to her, runs to it and shows unbelievable confidence. Thus, the child is placed before the vice captain, who introduces himself as Leibrand and belongs to the Lancer class. After announcing herself as Krina, the knight, she charges at the officer without any fear, quite the opposite. She acts as if she were playing or something like that, and there is a smile on her face that doesn't go away. The two begin exchanging blows, but Leibrand blocks the girl's attack easily. While Dogora is impressed by the girl's strength, Alan evaluates that perhaps her swordsmanship skill is already at level 5 from all the practice they do every day. Even so, the vice captain counterattacks and forces Krina to block with difficulty, making Gerda more and more desperate. The girl doesn't lose confidence and tries to retaliate, but opens her guard too much and takes a strong kick to the stomach, being thrown into the wall hard enough to crush the bricks. Gerda tries to run after his daughter, but he is held back by 2 soldiers, as well as Alan and Rodden, who are prevented from helping their friend. Defeat seemed certain, as did the execution of Krina and her family, but the Sword Lord rises again and begins to emit a magical energy that makes the rival's left eye tremble. With that, the girl charges at her opponent again and shows strength and agility 4 times greater than before, forcing Leibrand to give his all to avoid being cut apart. After a brutal series of blows, Krina manages to slice the vice captain's blade in half and almost takes his skull with it. Then, Zenoff declares the end of the duel and Krina's victory. As everyone watching the fight starts celebrating, the captain approaches Gerda and congratulates him for having raised a legitimate sword lord, then asks forgiveness for doubting the man's word. Gerda, however, keeps a stern face and focuses only on protecting his daughter, while Zenoff asks for a chance to discuss the future of such a talented young girl and if it makes him feel more comfortable. Jurda can bring his friends to the meeting. Hours later, at the village chief's residence, Jurda keeps a stern face the entire time after seeing her daughter's life put at risk. Alan understands why the chief's son is sitting at this table, but he has no idea why that axe warrior kid is here with his father. Maybe they're desperate not to be overshadowed by the Sword Lord. At that moment, Xenoph explains that he was sent by Baron Granville to determine whether it's true that a Sword Lord has appeared among them, and the result couldn't be clearer after the duel. Then Xenoph informs Deboji that, by order of their master, this village shall be called Krina Village from today onward. According to the captain, 3 years ago a Sword Lord was born into a count's family. But Alan doesn't understand how, since, from what he remembers of the game's rules, someone of that class can only be born as a servant, commoner, or baron. Anyway, the officer adds that this person even served the royal family but failed to meet expectations, which led to a reevaluation that determined this person was actually just an ordinary swordsman. It was later discovered that many members of the nobility greatly exaggerated this individual's talents, which ultimately led to the creation of this rule of always reevaluating children who are considered special. With that said, Xenoph apologizes once again to Jurda for subjecting his daughter to such a difficult judgment, and asks him to raise the girl with dedication, because at the age of 12 she will be able to study at the academy and, eventually, serve the royal family. Dogora asks if anyone can enter this academy to become a knight, and the boy's father apologizes for his son's interruption. Showing patience, the captain replies that an instructor will be sent to this village, so Dogora should dedicate himself to studying and training to earn his approval for the academy. Krina says that Alan can study with them, but Dogora says that brainless people like him, without talent, aren't capable of doing that. Krina quickly rushes to defend her friend again, and Alan finds it funny to be 40 years old and being defended by a 5-year-old girl. By the way, Xenoph finally notices Alan, and upon realizing who his father is, he stands up from his chair to greet Rodden, the boar hunter, a true local legend. Rodden doesn't understand where all this admiration is coming from, and the captain explains that his baron is passionate about the boar meat served by their village. In that moment, Alan thinks about how his father and the other workers risked their lives to hunt that beast. But the baron was the one who kept the meat. Still, he is happy about the respect the captain is showing Rodden. After the meeting ends and the two families separate, Rodden comments to his son about how Krina might become a heroine like the ones from the stories, but that even servants like him can sometimes be acknowledged by nobles. In any case, the man believes his son still has a chance to achieve great deeds in life, since he carries his father's genes. With that said, Alan takes out 2 fruits he stole from the meeting to give to his mother and brother, and the two burst into laughter when Rodden shows that he stole even more. The next day, the boy is overjoyed with some excellent news. He finally leveled up his conjuration skill, unlocking the enchantment technique and gaining the ability to summon F-rank creatures. Apparently, he still needs to fuse 2 cards together to create a new one. Just like what happened with Chappie, the bird. Right away, the kid gets totally hyped at the thought of summoning some Shinryu-like dragon, and he also gets excited about the fact that his card inventory limit increased from 20 to 30. It's been 2 years since Alan last leveled up his conjuration skill, which explains his happiness. That night, as the family gathers around the indoor fire, Teresia feels her 3rd child kicking inside her now huge belly. Alan offers to wash the dishes to ease his mother's workload, while Mash asks if he's going to get a new baby brother. Teresia comments that, because the kicks are a bit gentler this time, the next baby will be a girl. When her husband points out that it's time to think of a name, she reminds him that he promised she would be the one to choose the girls' names. While Teresia thinks about it, Alan celebrates after receiving a message from Elmia in his book saying that all his mana points have been fully restored. His parents notice that he's always spaced out since they can't see the book. They must assume the kid is a bit delusional, and they joke about it with him. So the boy changes the subject and mentions how his father's scar has improved. Rodden explains that he got that mark after going through the trial of the gods during today's boar hunt. When Alan asks what that means, his father explains that the trial of the gods is a special moment that sometimes occurs during hunts, when you suddenly feel a surge of energy that heals all wounds and wipes away all exhaustion, which is always great. Hearing this, Alan imagines that this must be how people describe the process of leveling up in this world. Since his father is a veteran boar hunter, highly respected by the community, even though Alan can't check his status, He assumes his father must be at a pretty high level. On the other hand, even though Alan celebrated his recent evolution, he's still level 1 and he'll stay that way unless he fights creatures strong enough to give him some XP. The problem is that servants like him can't leave the village without permission, unless they're going out to hunt, which is the only exception. Because of that, Alan volunteers for the next hunting expedition. But Rodden shuts him down immediately, saying that hunting isn't a game, but something extremely dangerous that can cost lives. Even Teresia is shocked by her husband's bluntness. Alan doesn't say another word about it, but he doesn't give up on evolving in his own way. Before going to sleep, he checks the book again and thinks he finally understood the message he received. After all, he had sent some complaints in full toxic player fashion, which ended up paying off since the devs fixed the text bug. Besides that, the message said, "We sent a prophetic message to the Great Pope to warn everyone." Alan finds the strange combination of words amusing, and then reflects on how all his attributes are ranked E because leveling up in Hell mode is so slow. However, the devs also sent an attachment showing only the raw data, revealing that Alan actually has S rank mana points and intelligence. Looking closer, he also has a few A and C ranks, which makes him roughly on the same level as Krina overall. Excited by this, Alan can't wait to test his enchantment skill, so he tries it on Denka. The result is a boost to the monster's stats, the same stats that work as buffs for the summoner resistance and agility. However, when Alan enchants the insect, the enchantment does not affect the buff, which stays the same. When summoned, Denka wasn't larger or more intimidating, even though he was clearly stronger. This shows Alan that being a summoner is much more than simply calling forth giant creatures. Speaking of size, Teresia eventually walks into the room and is startled at the sight of Denka, so she steps on the poor thing again and kills it. A few days later, in the morning, Rodden heads out to hunt, while Alan, after spending several nights enchanting and removing enchantments, discovers that card enchantments don't disappear, which means that as long as he has mana to spare, it's a good idea to enchant every card he has in his inventory. He experimented with several card fusions, but still hasn't managed to unlock any new type of monster. After using every possible combination, he's left with only one, so the boy prays that all his luck is gathered for this final attempt. He combines the F-rank insect with the F-rank bird, and the result is quite unexpected, although not exactly satisfying. The card he gets is called Grass F, and the kid had no idea that grass was something you could even summon, to be honest. On the other hand, the thing has an impressive buff of plus 7 mana points, which can go up to 12. For a summoner like Alan, that's pure gold. Normally, he would expect to spend decades leveling up in Hell mode, but maybe this new card can cut a few years off the journey. Without wasting time, he summons the card and notices it's basically a walking apple. He decides to call the creature Apo, even though he knows it doesn't sound very original. Looking at Apo's twig-like arms and legs, Alan assumes it isn't meant for combat. Then the creature displays its panel showing the skill Aroma, which essentially means it buries itself underground and grows a small sprout from the top of its head that sticks out above the surface. At least, as the skill's name suggests, the smell is pleasant like essential oil. Alan has no idea what this is supposed to be useful for, but he celebrates the fact that his garden is now one step closer to becoming a botanical paradise, before remembering that he didn't come to this ice-sky world to become a gardener. Teresia comes over to call her son for lunch, so Alan rushes to tell Apo to return to the card, but his command simply doesn't work. When Teresia approaches, having no idea there was a sprout like that growing in the yard, she admires the plant's aroma while the boy wonders what the purpose of that smell is. Later, Alan trains as usual with Krina. Even though he didn't get beaten up this time, it's still obvious he has no chance of going head-to-head with that girl. On the other hand, to his surprise, Krina feels that her partner is tougher than before, and this makes Alan immediately grab his book to check. In the end, his swordsmanship skill really has gone up to level 3, and the expansion of his inventory gave him more space to buff his defense and attack. The boy even wonders whether Apo's scent has anything to do with it. For example, he remembers that Fido was his first card, with a skill called Bite. He really wanted to test that spell, but he was afraid the stray dog would attack people in the street. Krina then asks if he's feeling okay, because he's been talking to himself for a straight 20 seconds. Toward the end of the afternoon, after so much practice, Alan has already thrown stones at the same spot on the tree about 20,000 times, which opened a hole in the trunk, yet there's still no sign that he's leveled up. Besides that, the poor kid can't devote all his time to training. since he needs to watch his little brother and help his mother with chores because she's pregnant. For a moment, he thinks about giving up. But then he asks himself, what if I'm just one stone away from leveling up? Well, he's about to throw another stone when his brother calls his attention to the many plants that have sprouted in the yard, basically forming a little garden. Setting that aside for now, Alan picks up his book and thinks that, because of aroma, opposed skill, he managed to reduce his total mana recovery time from 6 hours to 5, which gives him more time to do other things. However, the truth is that it still feels like he never has enough time. Looking up at the sky, Alan observes the migration of the Albahiron, the birds that inspired his name. At nightfall, while Mash is sleeping, Alan and Teresia feel that Rodden is taking too long to return from the hunt. Suddenly, the worst happens. Rodden's fellow hunters appear carrying the father of the family on a wooden plank, under heavy rain, and he has serious injuries. They bring him inside while the others wait outside. Gerda explains to the family that Rodden was pierced through the stomach by a boar's tusk. Trying to stay calm, Teresia notes that they already cauterized the wound, which stopped the bleeding. Gerda says they kept him alive thanks to a healing herb called Mueller's flower. Teresia doesn't understand how they even got access to something so expensive. And the hunter recalls the day the knights came to the village to test Krina. As part of their apology for being too rough with the girl, the captain gave the hunters a handful of gold coins, and looking at things now, they'd be in deep trouble if they hadn't received that money. Suddenly, a few furious hunters start blaming a certain commoner for what happened to Rodden. Because of all the shouting, Mash wakes up and starts crying at the obviously stressful and frightening scene for such a young child. Seeing this, the men decide to step outside and give the family some space. After everyone leaves, Alan asks Gerda what this story about a commoner being at fault is. Gerda explains that a few days ago they were called by the chief and ordered to include some ordinary citizens in the hunt. As everyone knows, boar meat is extremely valuable to the nobles, and it's also known that most of that meat stays with them, leaving only the scraps for the hunters. From time to time, they trade the meat for salt, firewood, or other essential goods that are very hard to obtain otherwise. It's also important to point out that no commoner had ever volunteered for a hunt before. It's a very dangerous job, and deaths are not uncommon. Servants, on the other hand, have no choice but to risk their lives to earn their daily bread. However, this time things were different. The ordinary citizens wanted to participate because they heard about a hero among the servants, Rodden. The day Captain Zenoff called Rodden a legend in front of everyone, the compliment spread and created the belief that inexperienced commoners would be safe as long as Rodden was present during the hunts. Naturally, Gerda and Rodden were not happy at all about suddenly having inexperienced men on expeditions, but there was nothing they could do against Deboji's direct orders. Making things worse, some of the commoners didn't even take the training seriously, convinced they could dump all the work on the more experienced servants. Then, today was finally the day of the hunt involving all those people. The commoners were given the easiest task of all: attract the boar and keep its attention. But when things started to heat up, the cowards panicked and ran, throwing the whole trained strategy out the window. In the middle of that, the boar attacked one of the fleeing men, so Rodden stepped in to prevent the worst and ended up getting brutally struck. With his head down, Gerda says that the boar was killed at the end of the hunt and that tomorrow he will bring Rodden his share of the meat. Before leaving, he asks Alan and Teresia to stay strong for their family. Seeing him go, Alan feels useless for not having helped at any moment. Carried by that feeling, the boy stays up all night trying to help his mother in every way he can, but she wants him to sleep since he is clearly exhausted. Suddenly, Rodden wakes up in a panic, shouting the boar's name, causing an uproar in the whole family. At that very moment, Alan questions why on earth he has been so selfish, since all he thinks about is becoming stronger. But what good is strength without a purpose? Life is harsh for the servants, the class he belongs to. For them, this isn't a game. These people give everything they have all the time. They kill a lion a day just to survive. And Alan has a little brother to take care of, with another one on the way. In the midst of all this, Gerda arrives with their share of Rodden's meat and is glad to see her partner looking a bit better. She then promises that she will help the family protect themselves from the winter cold while Teresia's husband is unable to work. Motivated, Alan asks his father to rest and promises to keep his family safe. This time, Rodden doesn't argue with his son or try to hold him back, because the boy's expression is pure determination. In fact, Alan starts joining the servants group in lighter activities, and strangely enough, He shows unbelievable strength for a child his age. Given the circumstances, Alan grew tired of pretending to be weak and decided to show his real strength. The situation is dire, and since the village already sees Krina as a heroine, no one will be too shocked. To work in physical labor, the conjurer removed all the mana point buffs and converted them into physical strength, then used the excuse that he inherited that strength from his father. From the moment he actually began working, the boy realized how unfair it is that the nobles keep most of everything the servants collect, and the little that remains makes it difficult to survive the approaching winter. One day, Deboji, the village chief, appears at Rodden's house with a young man who ended up causing the hunter's injury. They brought fruit as a way to apologize, and Alan feels anger toward the guy when he kneels down to ask forgiveness for what he did. Rodden doesn't go easy on him either and tells the boy to be more careful. But the one who really raises her voice is Teresia, making it very clear that the kid's mistake almost cost her husband his life, and that every family has loved and valuable people, no matter what class they belong to. At that moment, the servants who are friends of Rodden show up at his door to demonstrate their affection, respect, and admiration, and that makes Alan conclude that he has the best parents in the world. Later, when he finds a bit of free time, Alan clears a space in the field to conjure a bunch of jump frogs. Next, he hides in the woods after setting up several traps, then uses the provoke ability to lure animals that see the frogs as prey, so that he can get enough meat to survive the winter. With everything set, the strategy works, but only to a certain extent. After all, it wasn't just any animal that was attracted, but a gigantic albahiron, a rank B monster. Checking his status, Alan sees that his enchantment skill has risen to level 2, which increases the enchanted creature's stats from +10 to +20, and he has already enchanted all the monsters in his inventory. Faced with this, and determined to help his family, Alan doesn't back down and throws a stone at the giant bird's head, then takes advantage of the surprise to land a wooden sword strike on the creature's neck only to receive a kick in return. He then summons several Fidos, the dogs whose main ability is bite. The pack surrounds the albahiron and attacks, but although they manage to deal some damage, they are defeated by the monster. Alan tries to charge in with his wooden sword, but takes an even stronger blow than the last one. On top of that, he has been losing the buffs from each creature that was defeated by the enemy, weakening his stats and leaving him extremely vulnerable. Alan knows he needs to think of something quickly, because the bird is extremely aggressive, and at any moment one of its pecks could end up hitting him. So he summons Chiu Chiu, a pair of energy-draining creatures that leap directly onto the albahiron and begin their work by sticking to its skin. While the enemy looks dazed from the absorption, Alan recalls how his defensive ability drops significantly if the summoned creature is defeated, so he can't afford to keep losing so many summons. Therefore, when the two Chiu Chiu are defeated, the summoner brings out several more at once, along with a pack of dogs to attack. After all, if Alan is going to lose strength, then the albahiron should also be harmed in the process. Soon, once all the summons surround the opponent and open a window for the human to strike, Alan swings his sword forcefully at the bird's head, knocking it to the ground and ending the fight. Immediately, Alan's book appears to notify him that he earned 100 experience points, a great reason for the boy to celebrate intensely. Without delay, he heads back home carrying none other than a giant albahiron. How he even managed to bring it that far only God knows. Mash starts crying in front of the monstrous creature, while the father notices the injuries on his eldest son's body. Examining the marks on the bird, Gerda is fascinated that the kid managed to defeat a monster like this using only stones and a wooden sword. But he also notices the dog bite marks, forcing Alan to pretend that he was so focused on the fight that he must have used any means necessary to avoid becoming albahiron food. Confused, Gerda asks Rodden if he can begin the bleeding, while Alan notices the huge bump on the man's head, probably caused by Krina. Later, Gerda starts the bleeding process with Alan's help, and at the beginning he explains to the boy that an albahiron weighs around 60 kilos, and after the bloodletting about 20 kilos become dried meat. The edible portion is roughly half the body, and the feathers also have market value, although 60% of everything has to go to the village chief. Alan is shocked that even this turns into taxes, and Gerda laments that at most they overlook E-rank horned rabbits, but if it's a D-rank albahiron, there's no chance. That said, the hunter removes the magic stone from inside the corpse and explains that stones of rank D and above must be delivered. But since they don't use them in the village anyway, it doesn't matter much. On the other hand, Gerda remembers that Alan, still a child, had to face a magical beast because his father was injured due to an order from the chief. And maybe that could open room for a more favorable negotiation for the servants. With that, Alan approaches and whispers a few things in his friend's ear. Later, at the village chief's house, Gerda tells Deboji what happened, including the fact that Alan had gotten involved in such a dangerous hunt. Even so, the chief's eyes widen with desire upon seeing the much-coveted bird. So Gerda asks to keep the rest of the bird if he hands over all the feathers. Deboji refuses, claiming the feudal lord ordered the meat delivery to be increased. Since that's the case, Gerda offers, in addition to the feathers, the Albahiron's magic stone, and he begins hinting that the person responsible for Rodden's son having to hunt was the village chief himself after all. The hunter wouldn't have been injured if he hadn't had to take care of inexperienced grown men during the job. He also emphasizes that the family of the greatest hero among the servants could end up starving this winter. While Alan pretends to be extremely hungry, making a pitiful face, realizing he is at fault, Deboji ends up admitting that his order caused problems, which allows the servants to push forward and get what they want. In the end, everything works out, and they keep all the meat in exchange for the feathers and the Albahiron's magic stone. The next day, Alan seems to have enjoyed the game of hunting Albahirons so much that he repeats the same strategy that worked last time. He summons hoppers to serve as bait, this time attracting 2 birds at once. However, he was better prepared now, so as soon as the Albahirons landed, he sent the Chiu-Chiu to drain the enemy's energy. Then Alan throws a stone at each bird's head to further destabilize them, and sends his pack of Fidos to deal even more damage. With the birds subdued, the boy charges with his wooden sword and strikes both skulls, finishing them off much more easily than yesterday. After capturing that first Albahiron, Alan began hunting every 3 days, and this was the first time none of his summoned creatures were defeated. Since each bird grants 100 experience points, the summoner earns 200, enough to finally reach level 2. Extremely excited, Alan asks to check his status and is astonished by the evolution, though he laments that the increased stat values are multiplied by only 0.6 instead of rising in accordance with the level values, which is very strict. On the other hand, he was the one who chose Hell mode, so he has to deal with it. Still, in the end, the summoner is full of joy, because the reward for playing on the hardest mode is actually quite satisfying, despite everything. Now that he has reached level 2, he decides he might be able to tell his parents what's been happening. With a smile on his face, the boy returns home with the 2 Albahirons and impresses his father with his achievement. After that, Alan is surprised by the arrival of Krina, who, as always, wants to fight with her best friend. While dueling with the Sword Lord, the boy reflects on how today's hunt reached the goal of 10 magical beasts, and that by making dried meat from them, they'll have enough food to get through the winter and any leftovers can be traded for firewood. He also wants to take full advantage of this Albahiron migration period, since it's the time when they are most numerous in the region. To reach level 3, he needs to hunt 20 of them, something that seems very hard to accomplish this year. Distracted by all his thoughts, Alan ends up taking a hit to the top of his head and earns himself a big lump. That night, he decides to tell his parents that he received a divine oracle from Lord Elmia when he was 1 year old, granting him wisdom and power, as well as a trial that, according to his own words, not even 100 people would be able to overcome. While Teresia questions why her son, of all people, has to go through this, Rodden asks whether this trial was completed that morning, since earlier he still had the wound on his face, but now the injury is gone. By the way, the village hero says that he also overcame a divine trial, which made him believe that his son had done the same. The boy's mother asks about the result of last year's appraisal ceremony, and he explains that, 2 months ago, Elmia gave him another oracle. Realizing this happened recently, Rodden scolds his son for calling the god only by name instead of Lord Elmia. After apologizing, Alan explains that, at the appraisal ceremony, his abilities were low because it was assumed that his speed in overcoming the trials would be very slow. And the reason why no talent appeared was because it is a new talent, so it couldn't be evaluated. In other words, Alan does have a gift, but he isn't able to say exactly what it is. In truth, he does know, but he decided he can't say it yet because he's afraid that the fact he can summon magical beasts may cause problems if it's discovered. And beyond that, of course, he has no idea how to reveal that he reincarnated. Amid all this, his mother hugs him and says it would have been better if he had told them earlier. In any case, she now understands why her son always practiced swordsmanship and trained with stones from a young age. as well as why he faced such dangerous challenges. He did all of that to overcome the trial given by the gods. Rodden then asks what his son intends to do about the challenge he was given, and he assures him he will face it head-on. The father understands after all. It is a trial given directly by the Creator God, and says that his son can rely on his parents if he needs anything. Speaking of which, Rodden asks the boy not to tell anyone else about this, because it would be bad if people thought Alan was a lying imposter inventing things in the name of the gods. On the other hand, the father says he would like to at least tell Gerda, since the man keeps bragging that Krina is a sword lord, so it would be nice to show that his own son is also incredible. Sometime later, already in winter, while Alan and Gerda prepare the Albahirone meat, the man says he always saw the boy as someone special, but he never imagined he had received both a talent and a trial from the gods. Later, the two go out together to shop, and since it is Alan's first time, Gerda commits to teaching him how everything works. He also celebrates the fact that they got lots of meat and didn't need commoners getting in the way of the hunts. Taking the chance, Alan asks the difference between commoners and serfs, and the man explains that the main difference is social status. It's absurd, he says, that commoners don't have to pay 60% in taxes like serfs do. Adult commoners pay 3 gold coins every year, while children pay 1. Alan asks whether there is any way for a serf to become a commoner, and Gerda remembers that it is possible if the person pays 10 gold coins to the feudal lord. Aside from that, the lord may raise a serf's social status as a reward for some service rendered. Hearing this, Alan thinks that his family will soon have another member, so they will need a total of 50 gold coins. Next, the two arrive at a market carrying portions of dried boar and Albahirone meat, and Gerda teaches the boy how he can trade these foods for other products and useful items, such as firewood, salt, or even different kinds of food. That day, the boy discovered that 1 portion of dried meat equals 4 days of firewood, and now that he understands how these trades work, he decides to conduct market research. Over the following days, Alan gradually discovers how certain items are much more expensive than they seem at first glance. For example, the popo fruit, which the vendor wanted to trade 1 for a portion of dried meat. After another day of shopping, the conjurer writes in his notebook that 1 portion of dried Albahirone meat can be exchanged for a bag of salt, 4 mormo fruits, 1 popo fruit, or 4 days of firewood. Beyond that, the following coins share the same value: 1 gold coin, 100 silver coins, 1,000 copper coins, and 10,000 iron coins. A package of dried meat is worth 1 silver coin. So in order to earn 50 gold coins, Alan needs to defeat 500 Albahirones. To prepare for the challenge, the boy goes to a shop and asks whether they sell mana recovery potions. The vendor says he doesn't have anything that expensive, but that customers can always count on healing herbs. Since that's the case, Alan draws in his notebook the medicinal plants used to make potions, and also asks whether the shop sells the Murray's flower. But that is a rarer and more expensive item, so much so that the vendor only had 1 a month ago. When Gerda rushed desperately into the shop and cried for the man to let him take it for 3 gold coins, even though it was worth 5, and even asked to pay later because his friend was seriously injured and might die. Gerda did return and pay later, but the vendor still took the loss. Hearing this, Alan sympathizes with a merchant and gives him a free portion of dried meat. After all, that Murray's flower saved his father's life. The merchant was visibly irritated about the loss he suffered, but was caught off guard by the child's kind gesture. After that, Alan passes in front of a weapon shop and laments the high price of a piece of equipment that cost 5 silver coins. Suddenly, Dagora appears and provokes the boy as always, telling him to get out from in front of his house. At that moment, Alan discovers that this brat is the son of the weapon shop owner, and beside him is one of the village chief's sons, Palomas. Without wanting any trouble, the conjurer simply turns to leave, but Dagora doesn't care and goes after him to start a fight. When he's pushed, Alan evaluates that this guy is clearly a player killer from online games, so even if this fight won't give him experience, he points his wooden sword at the bully to see if he'll keep up that tough attitude. Dagora calls his opponent a coward, while Alan teaches him that the world is not a fair place, but since he's nice, he'll let the axe wielder find whatever junk he wants to use as a weapon. Without delay, Dagora runs off to grab a club to face his archenemy, and the two enter a duel. After a brief exchange of blows, Alan creates some distance and evaluates that, as he imagined, the attacks of an axe warrior are really heavy. But this kid is far from being a Krina-level fighter. As for Dagora, even though he's tired, he doesn't back down and calls his rival forward. so Alan lands a quick strike that sends his club flying into the air, thus easily subduing the axe wielder, who had to swallow his pride and admit defeat. At night, already at home, Alan watches his father change his bandages and say that he's feeling much better. Years later, at Krina's house, to everyone's surprise, Dogora is training with Alan and taking a humiliating beating as always, while Krina lightly trains with Mash, who will have his evaluation ceremony in 2 years. Entering the house after training, Alan sees his younger sister, Mira, who has already been born by this point. In the middle of this, Rodin arrives home with Gerda after the two were called by the village chief for a conversation. According to what was said in that meeting, the amount of boar meat that must be delivered to the feudal lord will increase from 10 to 15, so the commoners will need to join the hunts again. Obviously, the serfs protested, but this was a direct order from the feudal lord, and nothing could be done. If they don't hunt 15 boars this winter, the lord will recruit serfs from another territory, and if more serfs come, there will be less land for each person. Besides that, serfs who don't participate in the hunts may have their lands confiscated. And this wind that's coming could change Krina village forever. Gerda and Rodin tell them that, on top of that, next year the meat delivery will increase from 15 to 20, and that hunters usually work every 10 days. But now they'll have to hunt much more often, seriously increasing the risks involved. In that case, Alan suggests that the serfs allow the commoners to join the hunts, because, as was said, the meat delivery rate will double in a year, and logically the serfs alone won't be able to handle it. Gerda hates the idea because of what happened last time, but the boy, remembering that he possesses the wisdom granted by the creator god Elmia, would like to become responsible for the next hunt to help the newcomers. Thus, a few days later, Rodin, Gerda, and Alan meet with the other members of the group. One of the men comments that Rodin took a while to recover, but he insists he's 100% fine. Another asks if the kid is really going to take part, and the father says that this time they'll adopt Alan's strategy, but that his son will only watch the hunt. The boy, in turn, promises he won't get in anyone's way, even though he'd love to be right in the middle of the action. Of course, his father absolutely didn't allow it, but the most important thing is training the newcomers so no one gets hurt like that again. Speaking of which, the village chief's son, the one who caused the incident with Rodin, asks, "Don't try to protect me if something goes wrong again," and the hunter replies, "Focus entirely on the job." Lastly, Gerda announces that it's time to head out, and as Alan looks past the wooden wall, he thinks about what it was like to leave his village at only 7 years old. Something that feels like a small step in his growth. Far off in the landscape, he spots the White Dragon Mountains, where the boars come down from the summit in autumn to look for food. And legend says there's a mythical white dragon living somewhere on the peak, exactly the kind of story that motivates the boy even more. When they reach the destination, Rodin asks all the hunters to simply stick to what they were trained to do, and then sends everyone to their posts. Some time later, 2 hunters come running out of the forest after luring an enormous boar, and Alan personally feels what it's like to fear such a deadly beast. As the monster charges toward the pair who served as bait, a group of hunters closes in and drives their spears into its body to slow its powerful charge. Then the rest of the men attack the creature's flanks and start making it bleed. In the middle of all this, the boy reflects that everything is going according to plan. The bait team attracted the boar, the tank team managed to hold it back, and the attack team struck at the vital organs. This is the method his father and the others have been using for 10 years without needing great talent to execute it. At that moment, the boy calls for the chief's son to get ready alongside another young man, and he knows it's not a good idea to rely on those 2 skinny kids to tank anything to begin with. Speaking of which, as soon as the pair steps in, Gerda warns, "Don't stick those spears into your comrades," which already shows how little faith they have in the peasants. Either way, they join the attack and drive their weapons into the boar's tough hide. And after the group forces the beast to collapse, the blonde kid declares, "I've just overcome a trial of the gods." Seeing that, the conjurer figures those beginners must have earned some good XP from killing a rank C creature. Curious to see how much he gained, Alan takes out his book and notices he came out empty-handed on this mission, which clearly means that just giving the idea and staying back doesn't grant any experience points. On the other hand, the 2 newcomers approach the boy to thank him, because the way he guided them helped them do a good job. But that doesn't remove the bitter feeling the boy has about this victory. Days later, while he's working at the water well, Alan is asked by a buddy if he'll join today's hunt, and he says he'll watch as always, but asks his companions, Ask my father to let me use a spear this time. The guy answers, not even if you paid me, because Rodden would be furious if they came to him with that talk. Another man, who was listening in, admits he's jealous because he'd love to be part of the hunt. The first man tells him to drop the butcher knife and grab a spear, but the other refuses, saying he won't do that while his wife is pregnant, and that his joy lately has been having meat to cut. Hearing this, the boy gets an idea and asks the butcher for a favor. Right away, he takes the man to his backyard, where several albahirons were hanging with their feathers already removed, and he hoped the man would cut the meat for him in exchange for 2 packages of meat for each bird he processed. While the man examines the animals, Alan thinks about how these albahirons are not part of their food reserves, and that the carcasses need to be separated to sell the meat. After all, the boy needs 50 gold coins to free his family from servitude, but he could never manage that without outsourcing this kind of work. Later, during the hunt, the boy looks at the new members among the rookies and thinks about how they've slowly been adding more people to participate, and soon enough they'll have enough men to form 2 separate groups, thus doubling the number of boars they can hunt. Speaking of which, the conjurer also wonders why the Baron wanted so much more meat, since his territory doesn't seem to be facing any kind of food shortage. Meanwhile, the bait team brings out another boar so the same strategy can be repeated, and the tank team positions itself to stop the beast. Then Gerda orders the rookies to attack from the flanks, and once again the mission succeeds. While everyone celebrates, even Alan allows himself to join in. Since his plan to gain XP actually worked this time, he even leveled up. Earlier, knowing he could summon his monsters within 50 yards, the boy sent Denka straight into the commotion, and just being trampled by the boar was enough for the conjurer to be counted as a participant in the fight. Without a doubt, a masterstroke at least in the boy's mind, even if Denka was sacrificed in the process. 3 months later, the boy reflects on how this world shares Earth's tradition of celebrating the start of each year. And this year he was even invited to the village chief's house for the first time. On the way back, he and Krina celebrate the rewards they earned for meeting the quota of 15 boars delivered. When they arrive home, during a barbecue with both families gathered, the kids comment that the parents should have gone with them, but they say they would hate to start the year having to look at the faces of those stuck-up bourgeois. In any case, Rodden believes they won't have any trouble reaching the goal of 20 hunted boars this year, all thanks to his son's training method for recruiting newcomers. Changing the subject, Gerda asks, "What's in that bottle the brat brought?" And Alan says it's a liqueur the chief gave him as a gift, which immediately gets the 2 grown men excited. Seeing he has hooked his fish, the boy now reels in the line by inviting Mash to another spear training session. Krina asks to join too, but the boy argues that she's already too strong for that, and that the priority is helping Mash evolve because the kid has the talent to become a great lancer. That said, the more confused Rodden and the experienced Gerda became, the more the boy lured them into his trap. He asks, "Is something wrong?" And the 2 comment that the boy doesn't seem willing to hand over that bottle of liqueur. Alan makes it clear that it was a gift he received, so it belongs to him. Now, since he obviously isn't old enough to drink, he agrees to give the drink to the 2 men, but only if they beat him in a small competition. The condition is as follows. If Alan wins, the caster will be allowed to carry a spear during all of this year's hunts, and the contest will be an arm wrestling match. Obviously, knowing they already have it in the bag, his father and his friend accept the offer without thinking twice, and everyone gets into position. With everything ready, before the start of the match, Alan filled his inventory with Fido cards to receive a tremendous attack power buff. So when Krina signals the match to begin, Gerda starts off easily overpowering the boy until suddenly the kid begins to turn the tables with an unreal amount of strength, eventually winning the arm wrestling match. Next, after a short rest, it's time to face his father. When Alan grabs his father's hand, he notices for the first time the number of calluses there, proof of the hard work this man does for his family every day. Rodden, in turn, finds it amazing how much his son has grown to the point of wanting to compete with the old man, and the boy believes that the sooner they treat him like an adult, the better, because he will give his all in everything he does, even at his age. At that moment, Krina announces the start of the contest, and Rodden proves to be a bigger challenge than his friend was. Indeed, the hunter's calluses were not decoration, they were marks that carried the evidence that his livelihood is literally taking down giant beasts. Not by chance, the adult wins the arm wrestling match, and Alan admits he underestimated his father. Handing the liqueur over to the men, the boy reflects that, considering their strength, Gerda's attack stat must be rank D. while his father's must be rank C, which serves as a reference for the boy to understand how strong people who play on normal mode can become. Then, the old man says that his son will only hunt real boars once he wins a contest like this against his father, and the boy gets excited to reach level 4 before autumn. Meanwhile, after devouring all the meat, Gerda tells his wife to bring him more to eat, and when the woman puts the brute in a headlock, the boy assumes Matilda is also rank C, even if she doesn't look like it at first glance. 6 months later, in June, the boy celebrates leveling up. Upon reading what he gained with it, he discovers he is now able to summon rank E creatures, as well as a new type of monster. Imagining he needs to make a fusion to find out what type it is, he sees that his inventory has increased by 10 more slots for new cards, and he also learns that the buffs each summoned creature provides increase with each level gained. So he could beat his father in an arm wrestling match if he used 40 rank E cards. Besides all that, he notices a skill that has no level listed next to it, so he assumes it's a fixed ability. Suddenly, the book turns the page by itself and displays a magical hole so deep that Alan doesn't hear any sound when he throws a stone inside. However, when he puts his hand over the hole, he receives a mental image of the stone and a description of the item, meaning this is some sort of storage. Testing it, he discovers he can store basically anything in there, as long as it fits. Later on, while staring intently at the living room fire, the boy can't get a question out of his mind. If accumulating many items is one of the most important factors for any RPG player, why did he receive a god-level storage so quickly, and right now? After all, any important item, whether a key or a magic carpet, usually comes to you when it is truly necessary, so this must mean something. Anyway, the boy goes out to try his rank E summons. He closes his eyes and commands the summoning of an insect-type creature of that rank, but nothing happens. He then reads in the book that he lacks rank E magic stones to create that monster, since he never needed items to do that before. The boy thinks for a moment about where he can get those things, then remembers he stored in his room, next to his hidden money pouch, some magic stones from the horned rabbits he hunted. He quickly goes to fetch them. Trying once and failing, the boy tests throwing the stones into the magical storage. Then tries a second time and summons the card of a butterfly that gives a +10 resistance and +10 agility buff. However, as soon as he brings the butterfly to life, the boy's mother appears as always, but luckily the insect hides behind him. After giving several nonsensical excuses, the boy manages to send his mother away, and now he is free to enjoy his new summoning card on his own. Next, truth be told, he almost soils his pants when he summons a saber-toothed tiger that has a buff increasing the user's stats by 10, simply double what any rank F monster could do. The boy names the tiger Tama and puts it back into his inventory to try fusing it with the butterfly, but for some reason, it doesn't work. So he throws another magic stone into the storage and tries again, this time managing to create a rank E bird card. That's when the young summoner realizes he'll need a lot of magic stones if he wants to evolve any further. Later that night, during a conversation with the family, Rodden forbids his son from hunting horned rabbits, since they can be dangerous for children. Besides, he has no idea how the kid even managed to get close to those animals, considering he and the men dug a trench around the village a few years ago. That leaves the boy worried about how he's going to get the item he needs so much. The next day, while Krina is beating up Dagora under the excuse of training, Alan asks Pelmoas what he knows about magic stones. Pelmoas explains that they're small, infused gems that monsters have near their hearts, usually used to strengthen or activate magical tools. According to him, there are many different types of these stones in the royal capital. Rank D and C stones are useful to the people there, but rank E stones are basically trash. You can even find them lying on the ground. With that, Pelmoas spots a rank E stone in the backyard and hands it to Alan, who decides to search for more. Sometime later, with the help of his farmer companions, the summoner manages to gather enough stones to create all the rank E cards he was missing. But before he can test his new acquisitions, Alan is caught by surprise when his book suddenly flies into the sky during a strong gust of wind and summons, on its own, a falcon named Hawkins. Right after that, a wild boar bursts out of the woods and knocks the boy down from behind, so a bean-like creature named Beansy is summoned to heal him. Then the butterfly Papillon appears out of nowhere and releases a powder that makes the boar drowsy. With that opening, Tama leaps in, striking the enemy and finishing it off. However, another boar comes rushing at full speed to attack Alan directly, so a literal wall with an eye wall places itself in front of him, serving as a barrier for the beast to crash into and pass out. At that moment, the boy opens his eyes and the wind fades away. He notices that none of his monsters are beside him, which makes him wonder if everything wasn't just a hallucination. Troubled by that thought, he lies down on the grass to reflect, realizing that in this hell mode version of the game, there's no tutorial option, so he has to figure everything out on his own. Convinced that each type of summon has a specific role, he conjures the new cards and observes that insects are good for debuffing enemies. Beasts are highly offensive. Birds are useful for scouting and gathering information. Plant-type monsters work as healers, and stone creatures make excellent defenders. Putting them all together, Alan feels like he has a multifunctional party right in his pocket. And that versatility is what makes the Summoner class so good. It also helps him understand why he received the storage feature at this stage of the game. He wouldn't be able to carry so many magic stones otherwise. With that strength in hand, the boy believes that someday he might become even stronger than the Demon Lord. The next day, Alan, Rodden, and Gerda are at the village chief's house, where he informs them that the Baron will visit the village next month. Just hearing that already irritates Alan, since that's the clown who's demanding 20 boars in a single year. Speaking of which, Deboji explains that the Baron is interested in personally watching the servants hunt. Gerda also gets annoyed, because it's not enough for the man to demand that much meat, now he wants a little show as well. Rodden, for his part, doesn't care much about this, but he doesn't understand why Alan was asked to go along. The chief explains that the boy will be used as a guide for the Baron, and Gerda questions why Deboji doesn't take his own son instead. He replies that Palmoas isn't suitable for that job. In fact, the chief had been hoping Alan would show hospitality to the Baron by hosting a dinner the night before the hunt. At that moment, Alan realizes he's going to be used as a scapegoat to distract that man, and Deboji is trying to win him over with those malmo fruits laid out on the table. Deboji comments that, from what he's heard, the boy has been coming up with several very clever ideas that determined the success of last year's hunts, so he'll certainly be smart enough to do this job. The chief then asks if the kid is okay with that, and Alan immediately thinks to himself how little he personally cares about the Baron, but refusing this service would be stupid. Risking losing the chance to leave his life of servitude, maybe even being forced to hunt like a madman for 10 more years, only to maybe earn the title of commoner someday. After all, there is another way to obtain that ticket to move up in life, since the Baron can grant servants the title of commoner, so Alan accepts serving as his guide. With everything settled, time passes until the day of the important man's visit finally arrives. Surrounded by guards and riding in an impressive carriage, the Baron steps out and is personally welcomed by Chief Deboji, who gives his greetings to Baron Granvelle, thanking them for the warm reception. Granvelle tells his young daughter Cecilia to step down from the carriage. Inside the chief's house, the Baron praises the work the local leader has been doing in Krina village. After all, it's been 15 years since the land recovery decree, and there has been no greater success than within his own domain. He also apologizes for all the fuss regarding the boar meat, because he knows that increasing the required amount will create enormous work for the servants. But he couldn't simply refuse an order from His Majesty. Deboji becomes worried when he hears the king is involved. But Granvelle says the real culprit is Viscount Carnal, that scoundrel who insisted on bringing up the hunting matter while they were standing before the king. Setting that aside, once lunch is served, both the Baron and his daughter fall in love with the flavor of the meat, so he asks what animal it came from. Deboji has no idea, so Alan politely steps in to explain that the meat came from an Albahiron hunted just yesterday, since it is their duty to provide the Baron only the freshest ingredients, along with the best herb seasoning. Impressed by the way the boy speaks, the Baron asks the chief if he is his son, but Deboji answers that he is Rodden's, the hunter. Upon hearing that, Captain Zenoff, who had been accompanying the meal and remembers exactly who they are talking about, also recalls the young boy. Remaining courteous, Alan says he will serve as their guide for tomorrow's hunt. Still intrigued, Granvelle asks if the boy's father once served as a knight, but Deboji explains that Rodden is only a servant. Immediately, Cecilia becomes furious and questions how they could invite a servant to have lunch with the Baron, but the Baron himself scolds the girl and teaches her that even servants are important members of the domain and must not be treated like animals. Cecilia lowers her head and apologizes, but she looks at Alan with a face that says she'll stab him in the back the first chance she gets. In any case, Zinov expects the boy to be able to explain every detail of tomorrow's hunt, and he points out that the goal of 20 boars in a single year is no easy task. If this proves too difficult, his knights can take over the hunts. Honestly, Alan feels a bit offended to see that servants are still so underestimated even today. Meanwhile, Cecilia comments on how excited she is to take part in the hunt and see a really big boar up close, but says it would be even better to see a knight behead one. By the way, Baron Granvelle makes it clear to Alan that once he shows the fundamentals to the knights, they can take on the responsibility of the hunt. Alan replies that 20 boars per year is an insignificant number, and that the servants will have no problem meeting that goal. This leaves Cecilia and Deboji stunned, while the guide promises that tomorrow's performance will convince them. The next day, before they officially leave for the hunt, the Baron instructs the captain to personally take care of his daughter. The group then leaves the village toward the event. Cecilia is more than happy to go along on horseback with the butler Sebas, and the trip goes smoothly until they arrive at the observation tower built by the servants, which will serve as the base from which the nobles will watch the hunt. Once at the top, with exclusive thrones available for both of them, the Baron and his daughter are impressed by the view and by the density of the forest from which the boars emerge. At that moment, when the hunters arrive, Granvelle admits he is surprised to see that they all wear armor, and Alan explains that they made good use of last year's boars, since the armor was made from the animal's fur, bones, and tusks. The boy even thanks Granvelle for granting permission for them to use those parts of the boar. Finally, the hunt begins. 3 hunters enter the forest running, and the Baron asks what they went to do. Alan explains that the objective of that trio is to draw a boar out into the field where the actual hunt will take place. And since speed is essential, they all wear very light armor. Although there are many boars in the forest, the guide asks for patience, since this is a job that can take time. In the middle of all this, Zenov remembers Krina and says that a tutor will be sent the following spring to help the Sword Lord with her studies so she can enter the academy in the next exam. Honestly, Alan can't imagine that girl studying, but he assumes these people know what they're doing. Suddenly, one of the hunters responsible for drawing the prey appears in a rush with the boar right on his heels. Quickly, the tanks move in to box the animal in from the flanks with huge shields which, according to Alan, are made from the hardest part of the boar's hide, the part on its back. Meanwhile, Rodden orders the attack team to advance, followed by the Long Lance team. Alan explains that the Long Lance team is made up of the group's least experienced members, who only joined last year. At the same time, the attack team uses shorter spears, but since they expose themselves more, they wear heavier armor. Then Rodden strikes the beast directly in the neck, which is its most vulnerable spot. After that, Cecilia faints, unable to handle the spectacle. With the success of the event, Zenov comments that these servants may not be knights, but they can certainly be called warriors, and the Baron recognizes the value and skill of these men in battle. With that said, 2 more boars are lured into the kill zone. Zenov then orders Lebrand to be ready to intervene immediately, but Alan assures him there is no reason to panic, since the hunters are trained for this sort of situation. At the same moment, Rodden splits the group in 2 and puts Gerda in charge of the other team. While one boar is pressed between the hide shields, Alan thinks about how the hunters hadn't been able to carry out this task as well for the last 10 years, mainly because of the lack of proper armor and equipment. However, despite the enormous effort, 60% of the meat goes straight to the royal family, while the servants still trade days off to work elsewhere just to secure their basic needs. Obviously, there isn't much money left to invest in equipment, so the best path is to work on effective tactics to increase production and, step by step, obtain the supplies needed to raise the team's level. When the 2 boars are killed, Captain Zenov remarks that now only 17 more are left until the end of the year. But Alan corrects him, saying that in truth, only 10 are left. Everyone looks at the boy in shock as he explains that 7 boars had already been hunted before the lords decided to grace the village with their presence, so it's likely the target will be reached by next month. Because of this, Zenov rules out involving his knights in the hunts, and the boy is grateful, but taking advantage of the Baron's presence, Alan makes 2 humble requests. The first is the construction of 2 more containment shields to increase production. The second is that the hunters need products and goods that are not available in the village, more specifically, liquor. With the Baron's permission, the hunters would like to trade meat for this imported liquor to distribute among the servants, because as production increases and more meat arrives, there is a fear that abundance might reduce the price of this commodity in the village, and exchanging meat for liquor will help prevent an economic downturn. The boy is speaking about this drink in particular because hunters need to risk their lives to be effective, so it's necessary to keep everyone's morale high. Zenoff comments to the Baron that these demands are quite reasonable, so Granvelle grants the request and praises the guide's excellent work. On the other hand, when it's time to leave, Cecilia is not even slightly happy with the attention and recognition Alan received, and she tells the brat not to get too full of himself. She was so angry that she even lost her balance and almost fell off her horse, only being saved at the last second by the butler. In the next scene, Baron Granvelle had requested the presence of Alan, Rodden, and Gerda to personally thank them for the event, as well as to highlight their qualities as hunters. Not only that he gifts both families with a rise in social status, meaning that from now on they will be considered commoners, not servants. Outwardly, Alan tries to hold back his emotions, while inside he is exploding with joy. After all, he has been dreaming of this moment for 8 years. And now that he can hunt outside the village limits, he already imagines paying a visit to the White Dragon Mountains. Moreover, Granvelle will grant the same title to every servant who has taken part in the hunts for at least 10 years. Finally, when reminded by the butler, the Baron says that, by order of His Majesty, Krina village will be used as a positive example for the rest of the kingdom. But first he must tell the king the story of how the hunts in this region began. Alan has no idea how this tradition started. So Gerda, knowing this story, carries some painful memories, for Rodden explains that everything began in the spring, 13 years earlier, when 100 servants from nearby villages were sent to help develop these lands as part of the recovery decree. After 6 months of hard work, they had already made significant progress, until disaster finally struck. A gigantic boar attacked the village, and besides destroying buildings, it devoured most of the potatoes and wheat the people had planted for the winter. Because of the lack of food, most servants decided to explore beyond the borders. But since that wasn't working, Rodden stepped forward and proposed hunting the boars, and that's how the tradition began, out of necessity. At that time, the hunters had no proper weapons or training, but they had no choice but to hunt those beasts by force. Yet of course, such an effort would come with a price. In the process, Rodden lost a good friend and still feels guilty, even though Gerda tries to convince him it wasn't his fault. Hearing this, Alan understands why his father tried to save Deboji's son in that way. Moved by the story, Granvelle grants Rodden one more wish, whatever he wants to ask. Without thinking of anything else, the hunter asks the Baron to take Alan to work on his estate, pointing out the boy's intelligence and the manners he showed during the hunt. When he asks for the butler's opinion, the Baron hears that the child really is quite smart, and that taking him along wouldn't be a problem. At the same time, while everyone agrees, Alan himself is desperate for Granvelle to dismiss the idea, since the boy wants to live a life hunting legendary dragons, and he would have even less freedom working for the Baron. Either way, Granvelle decides that the boy will be his personal servant. Cecilia loses her mind over it and yells that it's disgusting to have a servant in that position, but the butler reminds her that the boy is already a commoner. Desperate, Alan tries to come up with an excuse not to go. However, when he sees his father crying with emotion, the boy changes his mind and commits himself to his new role, promising to serve the Baron with honor. A few days later, Alan's family prepares him to be sent to the Baron's estate, and other servants come to his house to say goodbye, including Krina, who is visibly sad about it. Wanting to cheer up his longtime friend, the boy invites her to one last duel before his departure. So, the two prodigies go head-to-head in a straight brawl, but to everyone's surprise, unlike what has always happened before, the boy is simply overpowering the Sword Lord in the duel. Alan reflects that he used almost all the magic stones he had stored to create 20 copies of Hawkins, giving himself a huge boost in agility. He also thinks about how Krina will leave the village to study at the academy when she turns 12 and will later take on some royal duty, so it's likely that they will never see each other again. At that moment, with a quick and clever maneuver, Alan subdues his rival, who cannot believe she lost. However, the boy declares it a draw, saying the tiebreaker will happen the next time they meet. Innocently, Krina believes she truly didn't lose, and Alan only said that to see the smile she always gives when she's happy. With the duel over, Mash starts crying again because his brother is leaving, while the older boy asks him to be brave and take care of their sister Mila. Then, Matilda and Gerda also say goodbye to him, remembering when he was still the size of his little sister, and now is heading off to such an important job. In the middle of all this, to Alan's surprise, Pelmoas and Dogora were hiding behind the fence, until the chief's son kicks his friend forward, forcing him to approach Alan and give him a dagger. almost annoyed at himself for doing it. Dogora runs back out of the fence and takes a nasty fall, making everyone laugh. After everyone has said their goodbyes, Alan is escorted by his parents to Baron Granvelle, who is already on his way home. On the way, Rodden tells his son that this is only the boy's first step and that he will reach even better places if he works hard. When they arrive, Teresia asks her son to come back home if things start getting too difficult. Then Alan gets into the carriage and feels awkward looking at Granvelle and his daughter, who already doesn't like him much. At the same time, a tear falls from the boy's eye as he looks out the window and watches the gate of his village closing. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.